In the past 48 hours, the European Union has taken one of its most significant financial decisions since the war in Ukraine began. A package worth around $90 billion has now been formally approved, designed to support Ukraine's economy and maintain government operations during wartime. At first glance, this may look like another financial aid announcement, but the scale, timing, and structure of this decision suggest something deeper. A long-term strategic commitment, not just to Ukraine, but to the broader geopolitical balance in Europe. So what exactly has been approved? Where is this money coming from? And what does it mean for Russia and for the trajectory of the war? Let's break it down carefully, based only on verified reporting. 2. Background and timeline. To understand this moment, we need to briefly step back. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Western countries, particularly the European Union, have provided financial, military, and humanitarian support to Kyiv. But over time, a key challenge has emerged. Ukraine's economy has been under extreme pressure. Infrastructure damage, reduced industrial output, disrupted exports, and ongoing military costs. All of this has created a situation where Ukraine requires continuous external funding just to keep basic state functions running. According to consistent reporting from major outlets like Reuters and The Guardian, Ukraine has increasingly relied on international partners not just for defense, but for salaries, pensions, and essential services. Now, in April 2026, the EU has moved to address this at scale. Key development explained simply. According to reporting from Reuters and The Guardian, the European Union has now formally approved one of its most significant financial measures since the start of the war in Ukraine. At the center of this decision is a package worth approximately $90 billion, combined with a fresh round of sanctions targeting Russia. On paper, this may appear to be another support package, but in reality, the scale and structure of this decision make it fundamentally different from previous aid efforts. And importantly, this was not a quick or straightforward agreement. The approval came only after months of negotiation and internal debate among EU member states. Several governments raised serious concerns during the process. These concerns focused on three main areas. First, financial risk, particularly how such a large sum would be funded and guaranteed over time. Second, oversight and accountability, ensuring that the money is used transparently and effectively within Ukraine. And third, long-term sustainability, whether continuous financial support at this scale can realistically be maintained if the conflict continues. These were not minor disagreements. In fact, they delayed progress and required multiple rounds of political compromise. But ultimately, the European Union reached consensus, a signal of collective strategic alignment despite internal differences. So what exactly does this $90 billion package include? Based on verified reporting, the funding is primarily structured as loans supported by EU financial mechanisms, rather than direct grants. This means the EU is creating a system that allows Ukraine to access large-scale funding while maintaining a structured framework for repayment and financial management over time. More importantly, the design of this package focuses on stability and predictability. Instead of short-term emergency funding, this approach aims to provide consistent financial support over an extended period, allowing Ukrainian authorities to plan ahead rather than operate in constant uncertainty, and this leads to a critical distinction that is often misunderstood. This package is not primarily about military operations. It is not designed to fund weapon systems or battlefield activity. Instead, it is intended to support the core functioning of the Ukrainian state itself. That includes paying public sector salaries, maintaining essential government services, supporting infrastructure, and basic administration. In simple terms, this is about preventing economic collapse under wartime conditions. Because in modern conflicts, the ability of a state to function internally can be just as important as its performance on the battlefield. Without financial stability, even the strongest military efforts become difficult to sustain. So while this $90 billion package may not directly change the situation on the front lines, it plays a crucial role in ensuring that Ukraine can continue operating as a functioning state, and that in itself has significant implications for the broader trajectory of the conflict. Official statements. According to reporting from Reuters, European officials have described the newly approved financial package as a lifeline for Ukraine's economic stability. This choice of language is deliberate. It reflects not just support, but urgency, a recognition that Ukraine's financial system remains under sustained pressure due to the ongoing war. Officials speaking in the context of the agreement emphasized a central objective, ensuring that Ukraine can continue functioning as a state, even under prolonged conflict conditions. This includes very practical, day-to-day realities, for example, paying salaries of public sector employees, funding healthcare, education, and administrative systems, maintaining essential infrastructure and services. These are not secondary concerns. In fact, they are critical to maintaining internal stability. European policymakers have made it clear that without consistent financial support, Ukraine could face increasing difficulty in sustaining these basic operations, and if those systems begin to weaken, the consequences would extend beyond economics, potentially affecting governance, public confidence, and overall resilience. This is why the package is framed not simply as aid, but as a stabilization mechanism. At the same time, EU officials have explicitly connected this financial support to broader strategic goals. The underlying message is straightforward. Maintaining Ukraine's internal stability is seen as a necessary condition for resisting external pressure. In other words, economic resilience and geopolitical resilience are closely linked. If Ukraine remains financially functional, it is better positioned to manage the wider challenges of the conflict, both internally and externally. Alongside this financial package, the European Union has also approved a new round of sanctions targeting Russia. According to The Guardian, these measures are part of a continuing effort by European policymakers to apply economic pressure over time, rather than relying on short-term actions. The sanctions strategy follows a familiar pattern, but with ongoing adjustments. The main objectives include limiting Russia's economic capacity, particularly in sectors linked to revenue generation, restricting access to key technologies and financial systems, and increasing long-term economic pressure with the intention of raising the overall cost of continuing the war. While the exact details of each sanctions package can vary, depending on political negotiations and enforcement mechanisms, the broader strategic direction has remained consistent across multiple rounds. It is important to note that officials have not presented sanctions as a quick solution. Instead, they are framed as part of a long-term pressure strategy designed to gradually affect economic conditions rather than produce immediate results. Across verified reporting, one core objective stands out: to increase the economic burden associated with prolonged conflict. This dual approach, combining financial support for Ukraine with economic pressure on Russia, reflects the European Union's broader policy framework since the early stages of the war. It is a strategy built on two parallel tracks: sustain one side's stability while constraining the other side's capacity. And while the long-term outcomes remain uncertain, the intent behind these measures has been clearly articulated by European officials: to shape the economic environment surrounding the conflict in a way that supports Ukraine's continuity as a functioning state. Why this matters: geopolitical impact. Now let's move beyond the announcement and look at why this matters. First, it signals long-term commitment. This is not short-term aid. A $90 billion package represents a multi-year financial strategy. It indicates that the European Union is preparing for a prolonged conflict scenario rather than a quick resolution. Second, it stabilizes Ukraine internally. Wars are not only fought on the battlefield, they are also sustained through economic resilience, public services, civilian morale. Without financial stability, even strong military resistance becomes difficult to maintain. This package directly addresses that risk. Third, it increases pressure on Russia. At the same time, the sanctions component reinforces an existing strategy: support Ukraine, while simultaneously constraining Russia economically. This dual-track approach has been consistent since 2022, but this latest move increases the scale. Fourth, it reflects EU unity after internal divisions. It's important to note, this decision did not come easily. There were disagreements among EU countries, particularly around funding structure and risk sharing. So the final approval also signals something political, a renewed level of coordination and alignment within Europe. Russia's perspective now, looking at the situation from the other side, it's important to understand how this development is viewed in Moscow. While the $90 billion package is a decision taken by the European Union, its implications extend beyond Europe, directly affecting Russia's broader strategic environment. From the perspective of the Kremlin, Western financial and military support for Ukraine has consistently been framed as a form of external involvement in the conflict. According to reporting from Reuters and Al Jazeera, Russian officials have repeatedly argued that continued support from Western countries plays a significant role in shaping the duration and intensity of the war. In official statements, this support is often described in two key ways. First, as external interference in what Russia presents as a conflict driven by its own security concerns. Second, as a factor that prolongs the war, rather than bringing it closer to resolution. From this viewpoint, financial assistance, especially at the scale now approved by the EU, is seen as enabling Ukraine to sustain its position over time, rather than creating incentives for compromise. Russian officials have also argued that such support can complicate or delay diplomatic efforts. The reasoning behind this claim is relatively straightforward. If Ukraine continues to receive strong financial and military backing, it may feel less pressure to negotiate under unfavorable conditions. At the same time, Moscow has suggested that increasing Western involvement could contribute to rising geopolitical tensions, particularly between Russia and European countries. However, it is essential to draw a clear distinction here. These statements reflect Russia's official position. They are part of how the situation is publicly framed by Russian leadership. They do not on their own confirm that Western support directly prevents negotiations or escalates the conflict in a measurable way. Those outcomes are complex and remain subject to interpretation, depending on political perspective and analysis. What can be confirmed based on consistent reporting across outlets such as Reuters is more straightforward. The European Union's financial support strengthens Ukraine's capacity to continue functioning under wartime conditions. This includes maintaining economic stability, supporting government operations, and reducing the immediate risk of financial collapse. From a strategic standpoint, this has clear implications. A financially stable Ukraine is better equipped to sustain prolonged resistance and manage internal pressures. And that reality inevitably shapes the broader dynamics of the conflict, including how each side approaches both military operations and diplomatic positioning. At the same time, it is worth noting that Russia's responses to Western measures have not been limited to rhetoric. In previous instances, Moscow has taken economic and political countermeasures, though the scale and impact of such responses vary over time. As of now, based on verified reporting, there has been no immediate, specific retaliatory action directly linked to this latest EU package. So, in summary, Russia views this development through a strategic lens, as part of a wider pattern of Western involvement that, in its view, influences the course of the conflict. But when separating stated positions from confirmed facts, one point remains clear. The EU's decision increases Ukraine's ability to sustain itself, and that in turn becomes a key factor in the ongoing balance of the war. Confirmed facts versus unresolved questions. Let's clearly separate what we know and what remains uncertain. Confirmed facts. The EU has approved a $90 billion financial package. The decision was finalized within the last 24 to 48 hours. A new sanctions package targeting Russia has also been approved. The funding is designed to support Ukraine's economic stability. Still unclear. The exact timeline of fund disbursement. How quickly Ukraine will receive full access to the funds. The precise economic impact on Russia from the new sanctions. Whether this move will influence diplomatic negotiations in the near-term current situation where things stand now. As of now, based on the latest verified reporting, The EU decision has been formally approved. Implementation mechanisms are moving forward. Ukraine is expected to begin receiving structured financial support. At the same time, the war itself continues with no immediate resolution. Diplomatic efforts remain limited, and both sides continue to operate within a prolonged conflict framework. In other words, this decision does not change the war overnight, but it reshapes the conditions under which the war continues. Responsible, neutral wrap-up. So what does this all mean in simple terms? The European Union has made one of its clearest statements yet, that it is prepared to support Ukraine not just militarily, but economically and for the long term. This $90 billion package is not about immediate outcomes. It's about sustainability. It ensures that Ukraine can continue functioning, even under prolonged pressure. At the same time, the accompanying sanctions reinforce a broader strategy aimed at increasing the cost of the conflict for Russia. What remains uncertain is how these moves will influence the larger trajectory of the war. But one thing is clear: this is not a short-term signal. It is a long-term commitment, with consequences that will unfold over time.